So with that, I'd like to invite Deb Diener up to begin panel 3.
There you go. Thank you. How about if I put it on here? So let me just do a sound check. Can everyone hear me? If you can't, obviously I can't say if you can't hear me, raise your hand. So, first of all, I want to say how delighted I am to be asked to be part of this really excellent program today. I want to thank Ann, Wallace, Taylor, Joanna, everybody from ITAC who made this possible. It's a particular pleasure for me to be here because so many of you are people with whom I've worked over the years. Ann and I worked, but not at the same time, at the Financial Management Service in the General Counsel's Office of the Department of Treasury. Joanna and I have worked together when she was at FTC and I was at Treasury. I know Laura. She and I were on a task force together. I won't name them, but there's some colleagues of mine from other agencies here, people I've worked with on other collaborations. So I just want to thank everybody and again, stress how happy I am to be part of this. We have on panel 3 a very interesting challenge. Not only did we have to follow Scott and have to follow lunch, but we're also the last panel of the day. So that's both the good news and the bad news. The bad news is we are actually given a topic that we could probably spend hours on, which is really the next step solutions. It's an important and challenging topic. The good news is the panel of experts whom I'm going to introduce and the fact that there's so many experts in the room. One of the things I want to say first off is that, and I get to do this as the moderator, I will be the heavy on this one. There is not going to be, in terms of next steps or solutions, a one-size-fits-all. You all already know that. We've heard so many interesting topics on the panels and the speakers that I think it would be tempting for people in the audience on the phone and in the room to say, okay, now we're going to hear how we can solve each and every one of these issues. The answer is the panelists are going to describe some very interesting solutions on which they're working, and what you will hear reinforced are many of the themes that others have already touched on. The use of SSNs, collaboration, partnerships, the complexities of these issues, the types of solutions that are being tried, and the fact that, again, the collaborations and the partnerships are essential to all of this. So I will just do a quick bio. You've got the longer bios in the package. I'm Deborah Diener. I worked for the federal government for over 30 years. I'm now a private privacy and independent consultant to nonprofits and organizations. I have worked in law enforcement as an assistant U.S. attorney. I worked at IRS and at Department of Homeland Security in senior privacy policy areas. I was one of the first two co-chairs of the Identity Management Subcommittee of the CIO Council's Privacy Committee, and that's how I got to meet some of you in the private sector. We worked on a number of federal identity management initiatives with the private sector. And I have a blog where I actually try and make privacy comprehensible in a non-legalese way, in a non-jargon way for consumers, and that site is also in my bio in the program. Now, there is a method to our madness in terms of the way our issues are being presented, and I'm going to go through the order of the participants because their expertise will become evident. But what we're trying to do is actually do an overview of prevention, detection, and resolution. They will each discuss the initiatives in which they've been involved. Many of you have already touched on them, either their names and or partnerships you already have with them or their organizations. So it's going to be very, very helpful for me to just do a quick overview so we can get into who they will be and what they will be presenting. John Carlson is the Executive Vice President here at BIS, which is the Technology Policy Division of the Financial Services Roundtable. John oversees the cybersecurity program. He served previously in a number of roles at Morgan Stanley, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OMB, Federal Reserve of Boston, and the United Nations. I'm going to omit people's degrees. They're all impressive. Just know that, but you can read that. That's not the most important thing I want to spend the time on right now. Our next panelist will be Eric Ellman. Eric's already been talked about in the group work that he is doing. He is the executive director or rather vice president of the Public Policy and Legal Affairs for the Consumer Data Industry Association. I know he'll tell you more about it, but since you've heard Eric's name in the association, let me just say that it was founded in 1906. The CDIA is the International Trade Association, represents approximately about 200 consumer data companies, and these are companies that you would know by names as the leading institutions in credit reporting, mortgage reporting, check verification, all the kinds of services for CRAs and others that are so important. I'll mention this because I love the fact when there's another New Yorker, even though I'm from New Jersey. Eric is a native New Yorker. He's been around government and public service for most of his life. He has served from 2006 to 2011 on the board of directors of Wonders Child Care, one of the largest nonprofit child care organizations in the D.C. area. And again, multiple degrees, and you can read about Eric's background more. We then have Ken Brown. Now, I want to say two things about the next three panelists, besides the fact that they obviously have expertise. Ken and then Russell and then Bethany are all employees, either of state or federal government. I used to make this speech, so I can say it in my sleep, but it's really important to know. No? Nonprofit, sorry. Do you still want me to say it? Yeah. Okay. I thought so. Because one of the things for Bethany and Ken and Russell is that they are here representing their own views. They're really good views, but they are their own views. They do not represent the organizations for which, the agencies for which they work, or in Russell's situation for the nonprofit for which he works, which is funded by the Department of Justice. And so understanding that, I just wanted to make that caveat on their behalf. So then we do have Russell. And Russell is he's an attorney, and he's the executive director for the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, which is part of the NITVAN. He's helped I can't do the acronym, but let's just say his organization has incorporated technology improvements from the legal services field, including online intake for clients and assistance to justice, access to justice, online documents for identity theft victims. He's an adjunct professor at local law schools. He has served in multiple capacities in other nonprofits, including as a lobbyist for the Stephanie Roper community, as the legal counsel for that foundation as well. He also is currently on the member of the Victim Advisory Group in the U.S. Sentencing Commission. I then have Ken Brown. Whoops, I did this the wrong way. Ken is next after Eric. Ken is the acting director of the Office of Enumeration and Medicare Policy at SSA. And that office is responsible for policy related to the assignment of SSN numbers and Social Security cards. Ken has over 30 years with the SSA, and he served in increasingly responsible policy and staff and management positions, primarily in the SSI, Social Supplemental Security Income and Enumeration policy years. Last but definitely not least is Bethany Case. Bethany is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a visiting fellow at the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime. You've heard throughout the day about that office and the role it plays. She is working with them on the National Training and Program Development Division. And there, in that capacity, she helps advise the Office of Victims of Crime on child victimization issues that impact federal policies and programs. She works closely with non-governmental agencies to develop technical training and technical assistance. And so with that, because they are the people you need to hear from, not me, I want to turn this over first to John Carlson. Whoops. And I'm going to give you this. There we go.
Thank you. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Anne, for inviting me to participate in today's panel. What I want to try to do today is to talk about some of the pilot programs and collaborations that I've been involved in, and a number of my colleagues, including Dan Schutzer, who's our Chief Technology Officer for BITS, in working with our member companies and a number of government agencies to try to improve the identity proofing process. And I'm going to touch on two major areas. One is an interesting, unique collaboration that we did through our sector coordinating council, which I'll talk about in a minute, called 5X. And then the other is an ongoing collaboration called NSTIC, which is the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. They're two very different models, so I'm going to talk about what we've embarked on in terms of working on these projects. But I think you'll also hear during the course of my presentation that there are a number of common themes with what we've heard from other speakers today. So I think what's really interesting about this event is I think many of us have been laboring in our little silos, realizing that we're actually bumping up against many of the same common challenges and issues. So first, let me just talk to you a little about how we came to identity proofing as a top research and development priority. So going back to the mid-2000s when BITS was developing a list of top research and development priorities, we were working with a council that was set up after 9/11 to strengthen resiliency, and it evolved over time to be focused more on cybersecurity-related issues. And in that, we outlined 7 top research and development priorities. One of them was the need to improve how financial institutions identify and proof customers, because we realized that there were a number of common problems with respect to identity theft, with respect to data breaches, to also trying to mitigate the fraud that has always been a challenge for the financial services community. And so what we needed, well, first we had to identify what we thought were some of the big challenges or problems. One was that financial institutions were encountering a number of challenges with respect to adequately spotting impersonations or detecting synthetic identities. Mainly this because financial institutions have to check an applicant's identification documents, which can be counterfeited. So we've seen that in terms of counterfeit driver's licenses, even counterfeit Social Security cards, and other types of documents. So we wanted to find a way in which we could go back to the original source to make sure that information was indeed accurate and matched up with what was being presented. The second was the need to verify Social Security numbers and also and other personal information with third-party databases. Because we knew in talking with our fraud experts that those third-party databases, while they were helpful and useful and important, they also tended to be based on public records or credit header information, which can contain errors or fraudulent information. So we wanted to find a way to go back to those original sources and find this information. We also needed to find a way to leverage what had already been put forth in terms of government programs. So the Social Security Administration had come up with, as we talked about here earlier, the consent-based verification service. We viewed it as being helpful. We provided a lot of commentary during the notice and public comment period, but we also knew that it was not sufficient, it was not timely, and it was not cost-effective. I think the speaker from the state of Utah mentioned $1.05 is the cost for validating, plus a lot of the requirements associated with that. The original cost was actually more on the order of $5 when it was first proposed, and we recognized that that's really not what we needed in order to have a real-time process that didn't require wet signatures, so-called wet signatures, because it's a consent-based verification program. Then we got an opportunity when the Obama administration came into office, and they had a number of fairly senior level executives that reached out to our sector. They had seen this research and development report that I mentioned that BITS working through the sector coordinating council had developed, and they came back to us with a very intriguing offer. They said, we'd like to partner with you on 1 or 2 top cybersecurity related R&D initiatives. So we huddled. We recognized that the identity proofing one was really perfect for this type of partnership because it really meant we needed government, mainly at the federal level, but also at the state level, to solve this problem, as well as the people in the private sector, in our case, the financial services sector, in order to make this happen. What was interesting about this offer was the administration was not only looking at it as a way to address some of our issues in the financial services sector around identity theft, but also to try to benefit other sectors such as healthcare. So remember, this is around the time of the Health IT, Healthcare Improvement Act, Obamacare, as it's being referred to today, but also a problem that government agencies were having in terms of validating who was coming to their websites for a number of government-based services. And they were trying to find a better way of doing that would reduce fraud, or would certainly not give people that shouldn't have access to websites access. So what we did is we engineered, working with the White House and the Department of Homeland Security, primarily their Science and Technology Directorate, and then the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to come up with first an MOU, which we announced in December of 2010, that would lay the foundation for what would follow next, which was a unique public-private partnership through what's called a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, or CRADA. And this is something oftentimes the government uses with the private sector in order to develop interesting R&D that will ultimately get spun off into the private sector for public benefit. So during this period, beginning in March of 2011 through late last year, we developed and completed this pilot, which we called the Financial Institution Verification of Identity Credentials System. Probably one of the worst acronyms you could possibly find, but that's the one we came up with. What it was meant to do was to demonstrate how the identification validation process would lower risk. That's important for our sector in terms of we're all about risk management and trying to protect institutions and protect customers. Our second was to provide financial institutions electronic access to required identity proofing data from existing government entities. And in this case, we're really more thinking along the lines of the federal government via identity verification gateways and services. Next was to model this in-person financial institution account opening identity proofing process, or processes in this case, since there are many. And then utilize synthetic data to build a proof of concept solution that closely resembles the data encountered by financial institutions in an operational setting. So we were starting from the perspective of we couldn't use live data. We need to use fictitious data as a way to try to figure out what were the obstacles, what were the challenges, in order to try to make this faster, more efficient, and more effective. What was interesting is that along the way, this was done in this partnership model. We reached out to, mainly our partners on the government side, reached out to a number of government agencies, including the Social Security Administration, and we encountered many of the same challenges that others have in terms of the Social Security Administration has a pretty defined view of what its role is, what its priorities are, and this was really not a high priority, nor was it really legislatively mandated. So they were running up against a number of institutional challenges in terms of what they could do and how they could participate in this effort. So that helped us in terms of understanding what was even going to be possible. So we started to look for alternatives as a way to try to figure out how we could do this in an electronic fashion that was efficient and effective. And what we learned as we were going through this process and doing kind of our due diligence process and beginning the mapping, we realized that the Motor Vehicle Administration actually has these agreements with the Social Security Administration to gather the information to validate for a number of purposes, both in issuing driver's licenses, but also for other purposes. And as we went through it, we realized, well, actually, this is a very interesting service that we could potentially leverage. So that's what led us down this road of trying to work with AMVA in terms of trying to develop this real-time validation process. We then followed it up. We have another entity that was created by financial institutions called Early Warning Services that was going to be using their real data in order to validate how you would do this by looking at 3 specific states to see how fast it would take, what sort of effect, how accurate it would be, those sorts of things. And that process is still actually ongoing. And so what we realized after going through this pilot is that by having real-time identity credential verification with these government-issued credentials, we can enable financial institutions to verify not only that an individual's driver's license or social security number exists, but also whether the driver's license or SSN presented is consistent with the name, address, and date of birth at the issuing agency, which is really the holy grail, what we were trying to get at from the beginning. And that we also realized that it would make synthetic identity fraud or stealing someone's social security number or driver's license number and adding new identity information much tougher than it is today. So that, in our mind, would be a significant improvement over where we are today just by engaging with this collaboration. So let me transition. Okay, at the same time we were engaged in this 5X pilot to kind of look at how do you make this process more effective, more efficient, there was also a very broad think process going on within the administration around how do you improve the identity ecosystem more broadly. There are many drivers for this. One of them was to try to build in privacy into the identity process from the get-go, as opposed to always bolting it on, or even dealing with the security issues on a bolt-on fashion, to build it in. So there was a lot of kind of inside the administration and outreach to the private sector around how can we build this better ecosystem around identities. So we have provided during this period a lot of behind-the-scenes back and forth with the administration on ideas and thoughts. We had also presented some letters through the FISIC to the government in terms of what we thought would be important components in building this identity proofing ecosystem. And then the White House really moved very, very aggressively forward with this, and in April of 2011 released their national strategy. And they laid out kind of some high-level goals from this whole effort, in that individuals can choose among the multiple identity providers and digital credentials for convenient, secure, and privacy-enhancing transaction, a very lofty goal, much harder to do than it is to say. And then also for identity attribute and credential providers, relying parties and users can exist and interoperate, resulting in stronger and easier to use authentication and identity verification in cyberspace. So you can see there was a interoperability component to this, which there are a lot of standards bodies and organizations involved in the space, so immensely complicated. Sorry, move fast there. So then they also established a program office, and even during this period of very tight budgets, they got appropriated $100 million over a 2-year period to do a number of different pilots that are in various stages of development as we speak. And then they established a program office in order to manage what has been created as a identity ecosystem steering group. And I think Deborah is one of the people that are on the steering group. It's a fascinating kind of conference of people from many different industries, different sectors, different interests, some privacy experts, security experts, standards bodies people. It's a very complicated group. They're meeting on a regular basis. Their next meeting is actually tomorrow in Phoenix. To put it in the short term, a lot of potential here, but significant challenges and a lot of competing interests. So it'll be interesting to see how this model will work out. So let me just close by pulling from what Steve Cogshaw had said, had talked about earlier today in terms of the analysis that ID Analytics has done. I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of people out there that are either deliberately manipulating their personally identifiable information or someone else's PII in order to improperly obtain products and services. And we know, because of the source of this meeting is all about protecting kids and minors. So obviously there's potential here in terms of leveraging some of these different pilots in terms of demonstrating that stronger identity proofing is needed and required for high assurance federated identity sharing, and that we have an opportunity with this NSTIC pilot to collaborate and to try to work on some of these issues going forward. So I'll end there and look forward to your questions later.
Can everybody hear me okay? Is that good? Good afternoon. I'm Eric Ellman with the Consumer Data Industry Association, CDIA. Deborah, in the interest of time, decided not to talk about all of our degrees or where they're from, but it's important, if for no other reason than because there was a football game yesterday. I went to law school at the University of Baltimore, and so I thought it's particularly relevant to bring that up here. That's all right. All right, good. So we're in good company. I want to thank you all for coming to this conference and for sticking it out as long as you have. CDIA, Consumer Data Industry Association, is a trade association representing some 200 credit reporting agencies, including some of the leading credit reporting agencies or credit bureaus in the country. I want to talk about a couple of things here this afternoon. CDIA and our members have a long history of identification, authentication, protection, detection, and remediation. We have been on the forefront for quite a long time, going back since when people first started talking about identity theft 15 or 20 years ago. We developed, as voluntary initiatives, things like fraud flags and trade line blocking and credit alerts and other things, many of which wound up becoming part of federal law when the Fair Credit Reporting Act was reauthorized in the last decade. So we continue, our members, to be creative and thoughtful and innovative. You heard one of the programs earlier that a pilot that in the state of Utah between one of our members, TransUnion. Early warning systems you heard mentioned, which is another one of our member companies as well. So our members continue to remain on the forefront of protection, detection, and remediation for identity theft. We work very closely, and we're proud of our partnership earlier, I guess last year, with the Maryland Attorney General's office. We worked very hard to craft a law that a lot of other people are looking to as a model, and we're very pleased of the work that we did working with the Attorney General's office there. No doubt there continue to be challenges in the area of child identity theft. We've done, I think, a very good job, as you saw some of the data earlier today. Identity theft for adults is, at this point, very low and hopefully becoming rarer still. But there are new challenges on the horizon, as we spent the whole day talking about, regarding child identity theft. There are, of course, challenges when nearly 30% of all of the perpetrators of child identity theft happen to be the parents or guardians. There are challenges, as other panelists have discussed before, about getting data from the Social Security Administration to do authentication and validation, which creates the pernicious problem of synthetic identities, etc. So we continue, like I said, to work very hard to try to keep this problem at a minimum. Unfortunately, I guess the good news is that child identity theft is still low, but unfortunately it's an unacceptable rate still. So we have to continue to work to meet all of the challenges as they arise. So I appreciate your time and attention. And when we get, I guess, 2 questions and answers, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Oh, good. Good afternoon, and I, like Eric, am also a University of Baltimore Law School grad, although I'm not employed by Social Security as an attorney, so nothing I should say today should be construed as legal advice. Okay. And being a native Baltimorean, I was going to wear purple today, but unfortunately I wore everything that I owned that was purple last week leading up to the Super Bowl. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about childhood identity theft. I'd like to talk a little bit about Social Security numbers and the relationship of SSNs to identity theft. Like most large government agencies, Social Security is involved in a lot of different things. And like most government agencies, most of that is stovepipe. So I dare say you'll find anybody who can tell you everything that's going on in the way of Social Security numbers and protection from identity theft at Social Security, but I want to kind of give you a broad perspective of many different things that we're doing and that's going on. Following the passage of the Social Security Act in 1935, the SSN was devised as a way to keep track of earnings of people who worked in jobs covered by Social Security. And the Department of Treasury issued regulations that required all workers to apply for a Social Security number. And since names alone could not ensure accurate record keeping, but a combination of the name and the SSN provided us with a very good system for reporting and recording that wage information. So our only purpose for issuing an SSN is to keep track of an individual's earnings and then to pay benefits based on those earnings. The SSN card shows the SSN that we've assigned to a particular individual, and when it shows the employer, shown to an employer, it assists in reporting the individual's earnings. The SSN card was never intended to, nor does it serve, as personal identity document. Although we've made changes to the cards over the year to make it more counterfeit resistant and continue to work to strengthen its security, the card doesn't contain any personal information that can prove a person's identity. Assigning SSNs and issuing SSN cards has always been one of our most significant workloads. So far, we have assigned 472 million SSNs to date. In fiscal 2012, we assigned 5.4 million original Social Security numbers and 10.8 replacement Social Security cards. In addition, we processed 1.5 billion Social Security number verifications. Originally, SSNs were assigned based on an individual's allegations and required no supporting documentation. Today, applicants have to submit evidence of their age, identity, U.S. citizenship, or current work-authorized immigration status in order to get a Social Security number. In most cases, other than enumeration at birth, the individual must also apply in person. We verify birth certificates for citizens and immigration status for non-citizens before we issue cards. Most original Social Security numbers these days are issued by enumeration at birth. So 95% of the SSNs for U.S. citizens are issued this way. We have agreements with all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico to participate in the enumeration at birth process. A parent can request a Social Security number on the birth registration form, and the information is sent to SSA from the State Vital Statistics Office. A little bit about the Social Security card. Originally, there was no incentive to forge or counterfeit a Social Security card. However, as its use increased and technology improved, counterfeiting became an issue. The law requires that the card be printed on banknote paper, be counterfeit resistant to the maximum extent possible. We've worked with the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the Secret Service, and the FBI to make the Social Security card more secure. The current card contains many of the same security features that are present on U.S. currency. We continue to look for new ways to improve the security and accuracy of our records. For example, several years ago, we began to issue Social Security numbers on a random basis. Previously, numbers were issued based on the geographic location of the request and the sequence of issue. For example, the first three numbers of the Social Security number were based on your specific state, and they were assigned specific zip codes. And the second set of two numbers, the middle two numbers, were issued in a certain numeric sequence, and based on available information, it was possible to tell when that Social Security card was issued, month and year of issuance. Randomizing the numbers helps protect from SSN fraud and misuse by making it more difficult to reconstruct an SSN using publicly available information and to extend the longevity of the 9-digit Social Security number pool. We don't know of any case where anybody has been able to successfully reconstruct an SSN. But there was a paper issued by a professor from Carnegie Mellon several years ago talking about the probability of that. He wasn't able to reconstruct an SSN, but if you have a document that contains the last four numbers, then you only have to reconstruct the first five. I guess theoretically it is possible. But now we're issuing all the numbers randomly, and the probability of that is very, very unlikely. Congress in the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, or IRTPA, has required an annual and lifetime limit on the number of replacement Social Security cards that a person can obtain. You can't obtain more than 3 cards per year or 10 within a lifetime. There are certain exceptions. For example, if you're an alien, you become a citizen, you get married, change your name, those things don't count against your lifetime limit because we need to know that information and we want you to update it. Additionally, our TPA required SSA to develop fraud and death indicators for SSN verification routines used by employers and state agencies issuing driver's licenses. It also required more stringent documentation verification standards for evidence of citizenship and identity. Contrary to its original limited purpose, the SSNs become the most convenient means to identify individuals in records and systems. With the advent of computer databases and automation, it's made the SSN the universal personal identifier. Legislative efforts have cut both ways on this. For example, the Privacy Act was partly in response to a recognition of the wide use of the SSN and limited disclosure except in certain situations. However, other legislation has required the use of the SSN for eligibility. So Congress restricts and provides more liberal access at the same time. While the Privacy Act provided some limits on the use of the SSN by government, there are a few restrictions in federal law on the use of the SSN by the private sector. Businesses can ask for the individual's SSN to apply for credit, obtain services, and apply for utilities. Customers can refuse to provide their SSN, but businesses in return may refuse to provide that product or service. The implications for personal privacy and misuse are of serious concern to us. As the use of the SSN has expanded, so have our workloads. SSN verifications are now a much larger piece of that workload. We perform these verifications through regular automated exchanges to ensure the accuracy of federal and state payments, to verify if individuals are eligible for benefits, to undertake debt collection activities, and to safeguard program integrity. In addition, our primary verification workload is verification of SSNs for employers to ensure correct reporting and posting of wages, and to other federal benefit-paying agencies to reduce program costs. SSN verifications is a good way to help prevent SSN and identity misuse. Many federal, state, and local agencies request SSN verification services, and most receive them as a result of authorizing legislation. For example, the Departments of Education, Justice, and Veterans Affairs, Office of Child Support Enforcement, the IRS, the Selective Service System. Federal, state, and local agencies validate SSNs for programs such as TANF and SNAP or food stamps, and unemployment insurance, and also for health maintenance programs such as CHIP and Medicare and Medicaid. We also verify SSNs for most state motor vehicle agencies and for the inspectors general for government programs. Under the Privacy Act, we may verify SSNs for third parties who obtain written request or written consent from the number holder, and that's the only way that we can verify it for third parties. There's been some mention before about the CBSV system and the complication and the record-keeping process, but we're required by law to do it that way. An increasing SSN verification workload is our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security in operating the E-Verify program. The E-Verify program is a free service that allows employers to verify the Social Security number and work authorization status of newly hired employees. All SSA's SSN verification services only acknowledge that the information submitted by the requester either matches or does not match our records. We do not disclose SSNs or any other additional information. Although our primary concern remains SSN fraud and the integrity of our programs, we do want to help prevent identity theft, to assist those who become victims of identity theft, and to assist in the prosecution of those who commit crimes. SSA has no law enforcement authority, and we cannot prosecute SSN theft or misuse on our own. However, we understand the fundamental role that the SSN can play in helping unscrupulous people steal identities and obtain false identity documents. Therefore, we warn people to be careful with their Social Security number and the card. In fact, we recommend that they don't carry their card and be careful with whom they share their numbers. In addition to help victims identity theft, we provide a fraud hotline of our own and refer victims to the Federal Trade Commission ID theft hotline. We provide up-to-date public information about protecting your SSN and the steps a person can take to work with credit bureaus and law enforcement agencies to reclaim their identities. We issue replacement cards when individuals had their Social Security cards stolen. We help them correct their earnings record if other individuals have worked on their SSN. And we can also issue new Social Security numbers in certain situations. We develop fraud cases, and where appropriate, we refer them to our Office of the Inspector General for investigation and possible prosecution. As I mentioned earlier, there are certain situations when we can issue a new Social Security number, and some of these apply to children. If an individual's done everything they can to fix a problem resulting from Social Security number misuse, we can assign a new number if there's documentation, such as a police report, of the misuse, and there's evidence of personal or economic harm, and the harm has occurred within the past year. If an individual has been harassed, physically, emotionally abused, or subject to life endangerment, we can issue a new SSN after evaluation of the case facts and appropriate third-party evidence. SSA can also issue a new Social Security number at the request of adopting parents upon the adoption of a child. The issuing a new Social Security number may not resolve the problems caused by identity theft. In fact, it can cause a whole new set of problems. This is because other government agencies and private businesses likely have records under your old number. Correcting records and obtaining credit with no credit history under your new number may prove very difficult. Also, because credit reporting companies use the SSN along with other identifying information, using a new SSN may not provide a fresh start, especially if your address and other information remains the same. Because some of the multiple SSNs that we issue are the result of SSN misuse, issues arising from individuals reverting back to use of their old SSN, in addition, fraud perpetrated by individuals who we've issued new SSNs to, SSA is implementing requirements to retire old SSNs that have been replaced. We've had cases where individuals have obtained new SSNs based on some of the requirements I mentioned before, and then obtain credit or student loans under both sets of SSNs. So while they claim to be victims of identity theft, they've taken two SSNs and gone out and they've become perpetrators of identity theft. Identity theft involving children presents some unique issues because children generally don't work, use credit, or have a credit history. Sometimes misuse of identity and SSN fraud may go unnoticed for an extended period of time. For this and other reasons, we have some specific provisions in place to help protect children. For example, in our employer wage reporting process, if wages are reported under the SSN of a child, we'll go back and contact the employer, and we won't post the wages to the record until the employer confirms that the wages were actually earned by a child. In addition, SSA is looking and developing new policies regarding identity theft and SSN misuse, specifically aimed at protecting children. Upon completion, we hope to publish those and seek public feedback and comment. In conclusion, while the SSN was originally intended as a means to provide ways of recording earnings of people who worked in jobs covered by Social Security, we must remember with all the improvements in the assignment of SSNs that the Social Security card is just a record of the SSN assigned to the individual and not an identity document. However, as we know, the use of the SSN for other purposes has grown significantly. The challenge we face is to balance our commitment in assigning numbers quickly and accurately to those who qualify for them and need them to work, with the equally important need to maintain the integrity of the enumeration system to prevent SSN fraud and misuse. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Russell Butler, Executive Director of the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. I'd like to obviously first thank ITAC as a partner in allowing us to join although I must admit I got confused. I thought I was in the University of Baltimore Law School reunion here, for your third speaker from University of Baltimore in a row. Mary O'Brien talked about NITVAN, and although I do pay her, I did not pay her to give me the promo here today. But one of the things that we have that we hope that people in this room and across the country will be able to use is some of the material that has been developed by the national network. This spring, you will be able to go to www.identitytheftnetwork.org/toolkit and receive a lot of the products that these 10 coalitions in 9 states across the country have produced. You will see brochures, you will get the materials that Hazel talked about, and the other 2 coalitions that are working with specifically dealing with child victims, but also the materials in general for identity theft. So we will encourage you and your organizations to take advantage of that material. As Mary indicated, we do have 3 of the coalitions that are working with child victims. None of them is really focused exclusively on child victims. But the materials that have been developed, we do believe, will help, including those 3 coalitions that have worked with child victims. So you may want to consider starting one. We'll talk a little bit about replication efforts in a couple of minutes. But you may just be wanting this material to add child identity theft to the components of your organization. Or if you're in the areas of one of the 10 coalitions, you can obviously work with the existing coalitions. So later this year, we're going to have replication efforts. And so there will be training and technical assistance beyond those materials in the toolkit to help those that are interested in identity theft, and particularly we can make those available and have those that are interested in working exclusively or non-exclusively with child victims. And you have the, and for those of you who can't see the screen, for further information you can contact info@identitytheftnetwork.org or 1-877-VICTIM-1 for more information. One of the products that we also have that we think that is good and will hopefully expand is some online material to help identity theft victims. And you heard Steve from FTC talk about the material that FTC developed for a pro bono guide for attorneys to help victims of identity theft. Well, we took that material and we created, not for pro bono attorneys, but for victims themselves to be able to use to help themselves to hopefully remedy some of the circumstances that they've encountered as being a result of an identity theft victim. So those 3 documents are letters to creditors, letters to debt collectors, and letters to credit bureaus. And we identified those that we thought would be the most prevalent ones that would help victims and obviously parents or guardians who are trying to help their children. So we think these are good documents that will be able to help victims. Now, how these documents work, there are now, you can see on the map, there are 8 states, and Arizona's URL is not there. But there are 8 states, most of there being an overlap where the coalitions are that have this, and there are other states like New York that have it that are more geographically based, but I can't give you a specific URL. And we hope to have a number of other states coming online soon as well. So you now have an example of one of each state funded by the Legal Service Corporation maintains a statewide legal website, and they're also available in other jurisdictions like Puerto Rico and Guam. And this is an example from Texas, and so if you land on the texaslawhelp.org homepage, there are basically multiple ways to access this information. So if you go to crime victims in the circle, you will be able to get to the identity theft documents. If you go to consumer, you can also get to those documents if you use the search bar, or if you go to the interactive documents forms. So those are just 4 ways from the Texas Law Help. Now each state has different material, but hopefully states will have mechanisms like Texas has to make multiple ways to find this material. So once you get there, and this is an example from WashingtonLawHelp.org, you can see that not only do you get to the forms, but you also have other information to help you as the victim of identity theft as to what to do. Once you get into the actual document, you have an avatar, and that avatar will ask you questions. And so the theory is, just as you were talking to an actual person, your answers to the questions depend upon the previous questions, so you're not asked questions that aren't relevant. But the avatar will lead you through the questions needed to fill out these 3 forms, and when you are done completing your document, you can print that document out and mail it to the appropriate person. And it will tell you what you need to have. And so if you don't have all the material that you need at the beginning, it'll tell you to go get the material and then come back. So they want you to be able to complete these with as minimal difficulty as possible. So we're hoping that all the other jurisdictions likewise agree to include this material in their statewide or jurisdiction-wide website. So you can go to www.lawhelp.org to find those in your jurisdiction. So one of the things that we're clearly hoping to do is to work with others to make sure that other jurisdictions have these on their websites as well. So you have my contact information. You can reach me at rbutler@mdcrimevictims.org, 301-952-0063. And thank you again for the opportunity to present, and looking forward to the discussion about other ways how we can move the ball forward to helping victims of identity theft.
Hello, I'm Bethany Case, last, hopefully not least, presenter for today. I am not a graduate of Baltimore Law School, but my home state did host the Super Bowl last night. You know, a little embarrassed about the mix-up, but you may be interested to know that the consensus among Saints fans is that it's all Roger Goodell's fault. So in some way, he's responsible. He has it out for us. So I have a little bit of a different perspective, I think, than everyone else who's presented today. I hope that's a good thing. I hope you kind of can follow where I'm going. So as Deborah mentioned in my bio, my role at OVC is to kind of advise and work on really a range of programs and policies and you name it, anything related to child victimization. So that's how I kind of got roped into this by my colleague, Laura Iskovich, who's here today. So I thought that maybe to give you context to where this fits into all child victimization, that it may be helpful to kind of provide that that basis. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about current responses to child victims, and this is the way things go nationwide. This is what I did before I came to work at OVC, and this is hopefully the way folks generally respond across the nation. So some current trends, I would say there's a strong recognition that children are more vulnerable to victimization. We've all heard about that today. We've heard about some of the additional risk factors. Folks in the field are embracing the concept of poly-victimization. What this means is that children experience a range of victimization, that it's not this kid who is sexually abused and this kid who is physically abused, this kid whose identity is stolen, that a lot of times it's all the same kids. So you may be interested in knowing about that. Victims of poly-victimization experience more trauma symptoms and are at increased risk of future victimization, all kinds of victimization. There are efforts to provide victim-centered responses. So rather than kind of addressing victims as we have in the past in a very siloed approach, okay, you were sexually abused, you should go here for for counseling. Oh, you were exposed to domestic violence in your home, you should go here. There are a lot more efforts these days to look at things comprehensively and looking at the victim as a whole and seeing what the victim needs. Which leads me to talk about multidisciplinary teams. Folks in the field who do this work, this is common terminology, so you can become familiar with it a little bit. We call them MDTs. Basically what that means is it's a diverse group of professionals who all come from kind of different perspectives and different backgrounds and come together to make decisions and plan and make sure that kids and families have the resources that they need. So who's typically on the multidisciplinary team? I listed 7 professionals who, this is really based on the National Children's Alliance standards for accreditation for child advocacy centers, and there are about 800 across the nation. So here are some of the standard members: law enforcement, child protection, prosecution, medical providers, mental health providers, victim advocacy, and the Children's Advocacy Center. There are other members as needed. So, for instance, National CASA is here today, and so if a child is placed in foster care, they may be appointed a court-appointed special advocate. That person may certainly play some type of role in this team. If a child has a disability, there may be service providers or specialists who can assist this team to kind of offer some insight and assistance in planning. So I throw this out there. What if a child is a victim of identity theft? Maybe someone from a financial service provider background should perhaps play a role in helping this team sort through those things. Honestly, the issue of child identity theft, until I met Laura and started talking with her, and she dragged me in. Oh, sorry. Gosh, what in the world? This wasn't on my radar whatsoever. I've had conversations with colleagues, even folks who are leaders of national organizations, and they say the same thing. Child identity theft, what? But when you really start kind of talking through it and take the time to have a conversation with someone, it makes perfect sense. Why not? I mean, these kids are victimized in all these different ways. Why wouldn't they be have their identities stolen? And particularly by those close to them, which is kind of the way things go in our world. So my suggestions for next steps are to build awareness on both sides. So I thought maybe I would, school you a little bit on the way MDTs work today, and then, I've been schooled all day long on the work that you all do. And I think that it's important that those conversations take place going both directions. That we leverage existing resources. There are tons of existing resources. I just told you there are 800 children's advocacy centers in this nation, and that they work with kids every single day. So maybe find your local CAC and go and talk to the executive director. And if they're not interested, find somebody on their board of directors, because most of them are nonprofits led by a board of directors, and to have conversations or ask to be a part of their board of directors. I think that perhaps one of the reasons for some resistance from my people is just that they are so overwhelmed and so overworked and so overburdened with what they face every single day, that child identity theft is kind of a foreign concept, and it's almost a relief to be able to say, oh, I don't have to worry about that. But I mean, reality is that we do. And so one of you all, the prisoners before, it was you, Mr. Utah, was saying that the challenge of working with law enforcement, that you have this high turnover, that the stuff that you're talking to them about is like a foreign concept. I mean, let me investigate, a brutal assault, no problem. But child identity theft, like what? And then, so it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of willingness on your part to be able to provide us with the resources so that we don't have to completely relearn a whole entire different different way of thinking. So let's see, what else did I say? Just partnering with and identifying service providers and partnerships. I was reminded by the two Steves, just in your remarks, and Steve, in some of our conversation today, that the real impact that one single agency or one single forum can really have, and how far we've come from when this first came on our radar. And it's huge. We have a long way to go, but if we all continue with this forward momentum and really come together and add the players who aren't at the table yet, we can really make a huge difference. So today we have some national partners. We have HHS, I think, is on the phone. FTC is here. I already said HHS, National CASA, the National Foster Care Alumni Association. This is a huge, fantastic, great start. So we just have to kind of keep going. So I kind of challenge you, some of your next steps. If you'd like to learn more about child victimization, you can visit our website. We have some fancy videos that are coming out soon, in the next month, hopefully. So it could be easy to learn about child victimization just by watching those videos. The Justice Department, the Attorney General, has a Defending Childhood initiative. It kind of talks about all these general things, not specifically child identity theft, but we all share kind of the same common themes. Find your local MDT or partner with a national organization. The National Children's Alliance accredits CACs nationwide. There's also the National CAC in Huntsville, Alabama, who provides training in TA to CACs. And partner with any child-serving organization. That could be your local Boys and Girls Club, after-school programs, anything, you name it. And that's how you can kind of, make these connections. So that's all.
So as the other moderators have done, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative of a first question. And I want to step back a little bit because throughout the day we've been hearing some great ideas about and practical solutions for what is one of the major overarching issues, which is how do you actually know who you're dealing with? How do you authenticate it? Scott, you were talking about having to have a parent validation form before the people of Steve's group, TransUnion, could actually allow the parent to enter the form. SSA talks about needing verification. Some of these other pilots are talking about verification. John in talking about some of the work that his group is doing, as well as the whole NSTIC. One of the key issues is identity verification. So I don't want to get too ethereal on this, but I actually think it's important to say, and Ken, I'm not saying SSNs shouldn't be used. I think they should be used a lot less, obviously. So what do we do, given we know the issues with SSNs? We know they're not being used for their original intended purpose, and we know from the statistics, from what Joanna was talking about, what our professors who've been doing research know, the abuse of SSNs. We know it's being abused in a parental setting at a far greater degree than I ever fully realized. So let me ask an overarching question to all of the panelists on panel 3, and then maybe anyone else in the room. What alternative authentication proofing mechanism should we be using in general, but as well as which ones might be most useful for actually helping to address the question of children's identification? So I'm going to start with you, John, and then anyone else going right down the line, I'd really appreciate, and I think the group would too. If we can't use, and we shouldn't use SSNs, how else can we actually know with whom we're dealing?
I think it's a very tough question because you have to start with some sort of foundation for who you're dealing with. And in many respects, that's, obviously the parent, when they name the child, is the beginning process. With the hospitals, if they're born in a hospital, get involved, then Social Security becomes a very important player towards the number that's assigned. So that enrollment process is really the first step. So that has to be addressed first and foremost. Second, I think we have to make it a lot easier for the industry working with the government in order to protect people by making that verification process more efficient, more effective for the responsible parties that are out there. I think another wrinkle to this is a challenge around what's acceptable to customers. So for my member companies, the issue is around what's a commercially successful way of authenticating an individual to conduct transactions or conduct business. If you make it too complicated, you make it too difficult, if you require them to do things like punch in a number that's randomly generated on a fob, many of them are not going to do that, or they'll go to another provider that doesn't require them to do that. Or you need to take into account that technology is constantly changing. So the solution that State of Utah has today on a PC may not be the right medium for doing that in the future. It may be a mobile smartphone device that everyone has, and people are going to want to use that type of device. So I think we need to find solutions to this. I don't think there are any silver bullets with it, but it has to be based on a risk management system, and we've really got to move forward on this partnership model to work in harmony with government in terms of how to address these challenges, because I just don't see any other way. There's not a technology solution to this. There's not a government-only solution to this, because you've got real people involved, and there are real challenges in terms of how you interact with them.
Let me try to respond this way as well. Deborah, first, let me perhaps take some slight issue with your premise about Social Security numbers being less available, or that they should be less available. The Social Security number, of course, as a universal identifier, is a key ingredient to determine who is and who is not the applicant for X, whether it's credit, whether it's whatever you're talking about. And really, the best way to prevent identity theft is to have a full panoply of information about a consumer, including, and perhaps most importantly, a Social Security number. It's one of the best ways to tell a bad guy from a good guy. So I think Social Security numbers have to remain a key element to that. One of the other challenges that we are now facing, Mr. Brown, or Ken, if I may, alluded to the changes in the Social Security number protocol, where that there was some relationship between the number and where it was issued and when. And that poses, and the fact that that numbers are now randomly assigned poses challenges in the identification and verification community, because at one point we were able to tell who might be a child and who might not from the year that the Social Security number was issued because of the numbering convention. Well, we've now lost that because the SSN has now been randomized. Ditto for the place that the Social Security number was issued, because there's no longer a correlation between the convention, the numbering convention, and where the Social Security number was issued. So what's beyond a social? There's obviously a number of other factors that can be used. Certainly reference, verification, and information services differ in some respects from each other, but they all have a number of key ingredients. They would have things like broad database, which is a database of known fraudsters, identification and verification products, quantitative identification prediction models, which again can help assess verification based upon patterns and practices. Same thing with identity elements, which can detect anomalies between the application process and other identification processes that are available. So I think that it's a long answer to your short question, but I think we have to continue to look at it from a variety of different sources, and I think we should all accept the idea that the more information we know about people, the better off we are to prevent and detect fraud.
I would add, since we're looking forward, I think one of the important issues that's going to be addressed in the next few years is the issue of immigration reform. And if we look at any of the past efforts at immigration reform that have come out of the Congress, they've all included some sort of biometric identity piece. Whether that would be included in the latest version of immigration reform, it's hard to say. We haven't seen really anything concrete, but some of the same individuals who have been very interested in those types of provisions in the past are working on the current provisions. So that may be another key identifier going forward.
Well, there's obviously been talk of national identification numbers. I think biometrics is another piece of PII. I mean, it's individuals, and, we don't necessarily protect it as such, but I think in the future there will be. But we talked about, the child welfare system. We had a little discussion about lunch, is that there are other databases, delinquency cases, that the government is going to probably have identifications for child victims. Social Security has representative payees for children and adults. There are a lot of databases that are out there that the government has that has even currently Social Security numbers. And I think the answer is to find ways using technology that it is not labor intensive. And I think if we can find that ways, if we know that there are over a million, and these are only the people who are having their credit monitored, there are these cases, and we should be able, with the use of technology, to identify, to let victims know, to let law enforcement know, and so that appropriate actions can take it. And I think we have to change and say this is a crime that deals with a victim, and it's not a victimless crime. It is not a crime that industry is going to pay the cost, so it isn't, the consumer doesn't directly see it. So if we make people aware of the cost of this, hopefully that society will address it.
I'd like to take a moment here to acknowledge the people participating on the phone, as they have been waiting patiently all day to ask their questions. And so I would like to invite Linda Foley from ID Theft InfoSource, who has been waiting much of the afternoon to address a question to the panelists. So Linda, are you there? Please press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. I was there last time you guys had a forum, but we didn't make it there this time. And thank you, Taylor, for allowing me to speak. I will keep it brief because I know you've had a long day. I appreciate everyone's efforts of all the speakers today. And I will disagree with one thing. If they know where I was born, when I was born, and when I was issued my Social Security number, they most definitely can figure out what my Social Security number might have been, especially if they can find out those last 4 numbers. And unfortunately, a lot of people give out that information. So I'd like to just clear that up with SSA. The point I would like to make that Jay and I brought up when we were representing ITRC, and who we are no longer with, was a 1710 database. And Russell will remember we talked about this at length. This is a database that, if created, would indicate a list of every Social Security number as it is being issued to an infant at birth. It would last until they are 17 years, 10 months old, and then their name would fall off of it. And the list consists of 3 items, maybe 2: name, date of birth, which would be month and year only, and Social Security number, which would be the main search number, because we know they changed the names. The point is, we need to stop the crime before it starts. And I've been hearing parts of that today. If we have a list that someone can point to, and these would be vetted agencies and organizations that are allowed to have it, and say this number belongs to a minor, doesn't matter what the name is or what the alleged date of birth is, because they changed that information, then we stop the crime before it starts. Freezes do not work. We've already heard that parents are using their children's Social Security numbers, so they have no incentive to put their name on IRIS or on AllClear or any other database, or to freeze it. Who protects those children whose information is not being protected because their parents are using it? We are that village, and I want to put a face to this, who protects the children from both unknown perpetrators and perhaps familial perpetrators. We need to create a system of knowing when that number is being used and stopping it. Because we started the term stolen futures, and Stephen will remember he asked our permission to use it for the forum 2 years ago. Because we said these children have their futures destroyed before it begins. Let's not let that continue to happen. It's been 2 years now. Let's make some progress toward stopping it for all children, not just fosters. They need to be able to have a clean record and move forward without baggage. Every single child who's born today,
Very much for your comment.
18 years ago.
We need to keep these in forms of a question, and I wonder whether anyone on the panel 3 this afternoon would like to respond to the idea of how such a list could be created, or whether this would be something that would be enveloped into some of the other pilot programs that are occurring now, if there are significant obstacles to creating a program such as Linda just described.
Or even Howard, from a legal perspective.
Well, if the concern is parents or other individuals working with the child's Social Security number, there are currently 2 programs in effect that can help with that. They're voluntary and they're both free. One is the Social Security program that allows employers to match the name, date of birth, and SSN for wage reporting purposes. And there's also the Department of Homeland Security E-Verify program, which will match the name, date of birth, and SSN that the employer provides against our records. So even if they change the name, it's not going to match. Those also contain history of fraud and death indicators in those matches. So there are some existing programs, and they're currently free of charge. The problem is not everyone uses them.
But we can build on those, Howard, and that's where I'm saying, can we go there?
Well, this is Debbie, and that was actually Ken Brown very nicely from...
Thank you, Ken.
Trying to suggest it. Actually, Howard, I was wondering if you did want it. You seem to be reacting. You have another question? Well, then... Terrific. Well, then, if you don't mind, then let me move to you, Howard, because I also want to make sure Taylor gets to anybody else who's on the phone.
Well,
so.
I'm glad Linda raised the issue of prevention, because I haven't heard a lot about prevention today. And one of the constituencies of the ABA Center on Children and the Law are juvenile and family court judges. And juvenile and family court judges deal with families that are coming apart, divorce, separation. They deal with domestic violence. They deal with child abuse and neglect. They encounter a lot of family situations where the judge may be in a position to give advice, to give information. My guess is that most juvenile and family court judges, and I'm not being negative about them, there's a huge amount that they know and have to know. But my guess is this issue hasn't penetrated very much within the juvenile and family court community. And I'm wondering what people around this room would say, what would be helpful for juvenile and family court judges to know, given what their constituencies are in these areas of divorce, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, juvenile justice, and so forth, because maybe this is an area where prevention can take place, where the right kind of information can be provided that might stop an identity from being stolen before it's stolen.
And I think looking at Bethany, I know others may want to, but I'd like to look in the first instance to Bethany and then perhaps Russell.
Howard and I, we speak the same language, so I don't think I'll be surprised. You'll be surprised by my answer. But I was really impressed with the document that that HHS put together, just kind of a basic, what is child identity theft, since that isn't on folks' radar. Just something in their own, in that particular language for whatever audience you're targeting, if it's child welfare or law enforcement or child and family court judges.
And Russell, I believe you wanted to...
Howard, I think one of the things that might be good, beyond just mere education, is what about if the judge is just included in an order that the parents every year have to check, as a condition of the order, and then the other parent will know that it's going to be used. They do that if you're going to take the child out of the country, If, for child support, you're required to get the Social Security number. So, I think, by bringing in more people and having them understand, it could be a model order that could be distributed to all the judges across the country.
I think that's a very good point, and Russell earlier mentioned Social Security representative payee situations, where, again, Juvenile and Family Court, we actually did a project where we developed materials for Juvenile and Family Court judges on the representative payee system involving juveniles. And yes, it's a wonderful opportunity to provide, whether it's through a form, a model order or something, that gets that information out there and lets parents be aware that this can be a concern, this misuse of a child's identity. Because my guess is, again, the judges are not informed, and neither are the litigants. Neither, the parents are not informed about this.
If I'm still able to be heard, Howard, you have Jay and my support on that, and we will be honored to work with you on that.
Thank you, Linda.
I know we're running short on time, and I don't want to, but this gentleman down here whose name I can't see, do you have a question?
Hi, yes. My name's Joe Mason. I'm with Intersections. Like many of you, been in the business for a very long time, almost 10 years, on the banking side, and the last 4 years on the consumer side. And know enough to have written a book about the topic. It's around here somewhere. Ann told me to bring a bunch of copies.
In the back left corner where Ann is standing.
So first thing I want to say is thank you to everyone for shedding more light on a growing topic. I've got a comment and then a question. So the comment is with respect to prevention. You just brought up the point about prevention, and I too noticed that most of what I heard today was around remediation, recovery efforts, less about prevention. What I can tell you is, having kind of beat my head against the wall for years trying to spread the word about identity theft and now child identity theft, is that there is a very eager audience out there of reporters, of journalists, of producers who want to hear more about this topic. The issue, however, is not one of statistics, facts, figures. They get a big yawn. They don't care. It doesn't drive interest to the audience that we need to drive interest from. What does attract them are stories about victims of identity theft. The very first person I mentioned in my book is Axton, sitting at the end of the table. She has a story of, and she brought it up today, someone started out with child identity theft, and it plagued her entire life. Parents tune in when they are presented with this problem and they don't realize that it exists. The first question they ask is around prevention, and it's, why is it that the banks, that the Social Security Administration, that the IRS can ignore the fact that it's known when a Social Security number is issued, and generally it's encouraged at 0 to 1 year, so it can be put on the tax return, that there can't be some coordination between the CRAs and Social Security Administration, exactly what Linda brought up on the phone, to flag in effect, to date in effect, the Social Security number. And it's the first question that the public, people who aren't immersed in this, it's the first question that they ask. So I would kind of pose that to a whole bunch of you in the room that could answer this, and perhaps it's more than meets the eye. I know it is, but it's an interesting question, and one that our audience outside of this room are asking.
And I can see a flurry of Eric will take a spot at this.
Well, just one of the simpler yet more complicated answers is that while the consumer reporting agencies have access to the Social Security Administration's death master file, which is when people die, we don't have access, and I'm not sure even the Social Security Administration has such a thing as a birth master file. And we are prohibited, as is the SSA, from getting or giving access to live Social Security number information, again, because there are laws that are put in place by Congress to prevent that kind of sharing.
And I would say, because I know that there was somebody here from IRS, and I will speak as a former IRS person who was Deputy Director of Privacy Policy, that one of the most Byzantine, tightly woven laws that is on the books is the Section 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code, which is a litany of everything that can't be shared. Now, as taxpayers, we should be happy about that, but in terms of what the IRS can and can't do, they do have a number of attempts to try and filter identity theft. It's on their website. I did a blog on it. They've been working on identity theft filters, both, and again, it's probably not precisely to the point of prevention because unfortunately sometimes it has to happen, but they have filters that are put on tax accounts so that if someone's social security number has been misused, the taxpayer or the IRS finding patterns will put a flag on it that somebody coming in and trying to file a social security tax return with that same social security number after the victim has already filed, saying an affidavit, and they have an IRS affidavit modeled somewhat on the FTC's affidavit, that tax return gets taken out, does not get automatically processed, and then the IRS actually has people who investigate to find out who the real taxpayer is. So again, it may not go to prevention, as you were suggesting, and Linda and others, we'd all like it never to happen. I mean, I'd love to be able to not have to go to a conference again on child identity theft, with all due respect. But there are ways to hopefully prevent, and I'm going to be a lawyer here for a second, prevent the accentuation or the repetition of theft. And so I urge people to at least look at the IRS's identity theft website. And I'm sorry, I can't see your name. I have
Steve Coggeshall, ID Analytics.
Oh, Steve, sorry.
It's all right. I'd like to something more about Linda's suggestion. I know there's sensitivity about making a list of a death master, a birth master version of a death master, although that would solve most of the problem. But I know there's a lot of sensitivity around that. But I think in order to substantially reduce this problem of children's identities being used in the commercial sector improperly, if we had nothing more than just a list of issues of socials without the names and dates of birth of people who are, let's say, 17 years and under, and that list could be, and it could be issued with the death master and controlled in the same way. But if it just contained the socials, that would go a long way to letting commercial organizations issue credit or do contracts in the names using those Social Security numbers. I'd like to suggest that for consideration.
And I want to turn, I'm sorry, I'll come back to you in a second. I know Steve had his light on as well.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is it would be great to be able to explore with the SSA something similar to the match, no match response, based on socials that we have in the credit files at present, to explore some sort of an approach to get that type of response so that we could definitively determine the owner of those files.
You wanted to, no? I don't know. I don't want to put Ken on the spot because I know what it's like when you come from a government agency and you people say, why didn't you pass that piece of legislation? And all by myself, I was going to go to the Hill and take care of it. So I don't know, Ken, if you want to comment. I don't want you to feel that you have to because I know you're not here to represent an official view of the SSA. But
well, just to say that that's another part of the agency, and I have no control over that. But to do any of that, I mean, the death master file is released because after someone's dead, they have no privacy over their information. While somebody's living, they're still guarded by the Privacy Act, and without consent, we currently can't do anything as far as releasing those numbers. It's going to take an act of Congress to get what you want.
So I'd like to just throw out one last question to the panelists, but obviously open it up. We've been hearing a lot, and perhaps this issue about, I'm sorry, Steve, were you done, or did you have another question?
I did have one.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Sorry, you saw my light on.
No,
Ken, I do hear what you're saying, but I think it's worth exploring ways to achieve that consent that would enable us to get that certainty. So I hear what you're saying, and I understand the consent factor, but I think that is something that should be explored.
But that truly would take an act of Congress. So I want to just close. I'm sorry, and okay. I'm going to close for me, and obviously we had a lot of really excellent discussion. I didn't want to cut into your time at all, but I want to thank all of you for your great questions to the panelists. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and it's clear that we have, what is the, leave them wanting more is what an actor is supposed to do. So we clearly, I think, leave this group, everyone in this room, wanting more. And the more will be the white paper that we will put out in about 6 weeks. And I hope this will stimulate a lot more questions and discussions among this group. I did just want to say
that many of you were saying, well, you can contact me here, and here's my contact information. We plan to distribute contact information for everyone who is in this room, everyone who attended. If you have some overwhelming reason why you want to opt out of that list, please let Taylor know as soon as possible, because otherwise we're going to circulate that list. I think it's vitally important that we all stay in touch now that we've established this, this ongoing dialogue, that we continue to talk and share the wonderful information, incredible resources, and the great energy that we've seen in this room today. So let me just thank you all and lead everyone in a big round of applause.